But if you look at the calendar, it's actually substantially longer. It's not 40 days, which I've always kind of like questioned. I'm like, I don't know why we call it that. So I did a little bit of research on Lent because obviously, again, we're in that sort of season. And it's interesting. I feel like we've been talking about a little bit, not necessarily in sermons and stuff, but just, amongst us, have been talking about like, sort of like Lent isn't even in the Bible, this concept of Lent, like why do we sort of celebrate this? Where does this tradition sort of come from? So that's what I wanted to talk about today. I did a little bit of research on it here. So first off, the reason why it's considered 40 days, even though it's longer in the calendar, it's technically that period of time from Ash Wednesday before Easter is when it ends, and it doesn't include Sundays. The reason being, obviously, Lent is a time of self-reflection, of repentance, when we're thinking about our own sins and the sacrifice that Jesus did for us, thinking about Good Friday and Easter. But this sort of tradition, again, of self-reflection and everything, they didn't want that to continue on Sundays because Sundays are a day of joy and celebration. It's the day that we worship. So the time to be sort of like somber is during the week, Monday to Saturday, when we're, thinking about these things and contemplating our sin and everything else. But on Sunday, we're still supposed to like worship the Lord and have joy in that and things like that. So when did this start? I did a lot of research, and it doesn't seem like there's necessarily this like definitive person or time that started it. But it does seem like it was started after the Council of Nicaea. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Nicea. This took place in about 325 AD, so we're talking about around 300 years after Jesus died. Basically what happened, a Roman emperor named Constantine, who had supposedly become a Christian, he wanted to unite everyone under the Christian banner, the entire Roman Empire. And there was a lot of confusion around like Jesus and how he relates to God and that whole thing. Because again, like to us, we've studied the Bible forever. We have a lot of this information around like the Trinity and stuff, but it was still very new back then. So they were still trying to figure it out. So there was just like a lot of confusion really around just theology. So this Roman emperor brought together like 200 to 300 Christian bishops, and they got together in like the Asian Minor, Turkey area, and basically kind of like got together to like figure out like, okay, what do we actually believe? So several different ideas came out of that council, but again, it seems like this was something, this sort of tradition of Lent started after that time. And at first, it seems like it was more for new believers, that as Easter was coming, that time period before that, they were supposed to be spent in repentance and in fasting and in prayer and things like that. So that's how it started, but eventually it sort of seems like it spread to just everyone sort of participating in those acts of repenting and fasting, especially before Easter. Over time, no surprise, the church got a little more strict with their rules on what that fasting before Easter needed to look like. So it was for a period of time, one meal a day after 3 p.m. and no meat, fish, or dairy. So they were very strict about that. Again, Sundays didn't count, so they could kind of eat whatever because Sundays were a day of worship. But during the rest of the week, they were only supposed to have one meal a day after 3 o'clock. And again, no dairy, meat, fish, anything like that. So all Christians were supposed to participate in this activity, in this fasting. In Pope Gregory in roughly 590 to 604 AD, he actually regulated it. He was the first one to say, like, this is what we do in our Catholic church specifically. Like, we do this fasting, we have this one meal a day thing going on. He started it with the 46 days before Easter, not including Sundays again. So that's kind of why it stems specifically from the Catholic Church. We as Lutherans still celebrate the Lenten season. It's still on our liturgical calendar because obviously, like, we came from the Catholic faith, so we still have like a lot of their same things. But a lot of like non-denominational churches do not really follow it. Again, it's not actually in the Bible. It's not really like listed specifically in there as something that needs to happen. It's sort of just a tradition in the church. In the 1800s, they started getting a little more lax about the strictness of only having one meal a day because I think that they were working hard. You had farmers and things like that, so they needed to eat to keep up their strength. So it says by the 1400s, they had slowly started adding more meals throughout the day just so people weren't like faint when they were going about their day. So first they started adding like a smaller meal in the morning and then a smaller meal at night until it didn't really look like the specific one meal a day after 3 p.m. sort of thing. And then slowly over time, it kind of moved from fasting and just abstaining from food to sort of just like giving up, good morning, just like giving up luxury, like giving up something that you really like or something that's a very luxurious thing in your life, giving up something you need as like a personal sacrifice for the Lord. So that's kind of where we've moved into this idea, not of like fasting before Easter, but of giving something up, like specifically something that we decide and not just food as a whole. Interestingly enough, as most of us know, so Catholics still really focus on giving up meat on Fridays. That's like a really big thing. You have the fish fries and things like that. So again, not that everyone participates in it, but a lot of people still do. And that stems from the Pope who was kind of in charge in 1966. He affirmed that we should abstain from flesh on Fridays. And I don't know if that's something to do with the fact of like Jesus' body being broken, on Good Friday, or like what that really looked like. I didn't find a lot of like specifics around why he said that. It was just said that in 1966 that people should abstain from flesh on Fridays. So that's, and again, that was several years ago, but it still today has just been like carried on as a tradition throughout the Catholic Church, and they still kind of follow that guideline. So why is it called Lent? Again, just from like my research, just looking at a lot of different like Christian websites and different pastors and theological sites and stuff, it didn't really give a specific of like why we use that word. Lent derives from the Old English meaning lengthen, so like the days were lengthening during that time. You have more like daylight. So kind of what I took from it, it sounds like that's just a period of time, like in the spring where winter is going away and the days are getting longer, and so they already called that time period Lent, and they just started doing these new actions during that time leading up to Easter. So like, we don't necessarily celebrate St. Patrick's Day in March because it's March and we need to celebrate it. It's just that we happen to celebrate it during March, if that makes sense. So I don't know that the term Lent necessarily has any sort of biblical context or anything. It was just sort of that time period of spring, if you will. It was, again, interesting to me that they specifically, the Catholic Church specifically chose like the 40 days before Easter to do this fasting specifically. That was what a lot of Lent focused around, was just fasting. And I didn't really know why they picked 40 days. It seemed a little random. I know there's a lot of times in the Bible it talks about 40 days, but I was interested to kind of read about that and kind of figure out like why this was chosen. Fasting, again, being something we see quite a bit in the Bible. So like you think about in the Old Testament, like Esther, before she needed to go to the king and ask for him to save the Jews, she fasted for days. All of her servants fasted. She wrote letters to family and friends and asked to fast. Like that was a time of really trying to just like come before the Lord and ask for his grace and his wisdom and his guidance and for him to be in the situation. We saw other people, notable people in the Bible. Daniel fasted. It talks about fasting quite a bit in the Psalms, that David fasted. He encourages us to fast, things like that. It's very prevalent in the Gospels as well. So the most, I think one of the most notable stories, and the reason why this was chosen during Lent to fast for that 40 days before Easter, is actually because of Jesus's beginning of his ministry. Right after he's baptized, it says he was called into the wilderness where he fasted for 40 days and was tempted by the devil. So if you guys remember that story, basically what happens is, so again, Jesus is called into the desert and he's spending time, he doesn't eat for 40 days, which I feel like just in my puny human body, I'm like, I just can't even imagine how he did that. But he didn't eat for 40 days, and during that time, I'm sure was just spent in prayer and worship, spending time with the Lord. And then the devil goes and tempts him, and I'm not going to get into it too much. I'm sure you guys kind of remember this story, but the first thing he does is he says, like, man, you must be so hungry. Like, why don't you just turn this rock into bread and you can eat, and then you won't be hungry? And Jesus is, of course, like God will sustain me physically. Like, I don't need to do that. I can, but I don't need to because God will sustain me. And then, of course, the devil is tempting him and saying, like, oh, like, I will, if you just worship me, if you just leave God, I will give you all of the countries in the whole world, all the people, this whole world will belong to you. And basically what he's trying to do is say, like, this whole time of fasting, Jesus said, you've been out here in the desert, that you haven't been with anyone else, that you haven't been distracted by the world, you haven't been doing anything else, just spending time with the Lord. He's like, now I want you to just abandon that and like come with me, right? That's kind of like what the big temptation was saying, like, you don't actually need to die for them. You don't actually need to be risen. Like, he was really trying to tempt him to not go forward with his plans, and to sort of like come with the devil. Obviously, he sustained. Jesus was not having any of it. But again, the important thing there, I think, this time of Lent is supposed to be sort of like mimicking that, not necessarily like, rebuking the devil and not giving into temptation, but more of just like spending time with the Lord and repenting and being in prayer. I used to think fasting was just this idea around sacrifice. So like we're not eating because we are like sacrificing for the Lord. We're giving up something that we really want, but we're saying like, God, I'm honoring you in this thing. I would put you above like my own needs. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad way to look at it. It is a sacrifice, but I think the biggest thing about fasting is just drawing close to the Lord, being near him, the time that we really set aside as holy. That's what holy means. It just means to like be set apart. So when we're fasting, we're saying like, I'm not going to be distracted by the world. I'm not going to be focused on my own agenda. I'm going to lay everything down and just focus on the Lord, right? Like set this time apart as a holy time to be focused on him, to be in prayer, spend time in the Word, that sort of thing. I also think that part of fasting is that the time that we would have been preparing that food, now we can use for spending with the Lord. Because if you think about it, like for instance, my days are pretty routine, they're pretty normal. When I get up and I walk the dog and I have tea, whatever, and then I have to like make my protein shake for my breakfast, I gotta pack my lunch, I try really hard to eat well, so I gotta like think about what I wanna eat for that day. Then I go to work, I have lunch, and a lot of times I walk my dog during that time period. And then I'll go back to work for a while. Usually by the afternoon, I'm hungry, I need a snack, so I'm grabbing for food. Sometimes that's like the time during the day that I take a break. Then I go home, and my husband and I are talking about like who's making dinner, what do you want for dinner? Again, we're trying to be healthy, so like what do we have that we can make that's healthy? And then we prepare the food. We sit down. Well, we a lot of times watch TV when we're eating, but we sit down and we're eating. And I think there's something good about eating together. I think that there's like a fellowship and a community aspect in that. But if you think about all the time that I spend during the day thinking about food, preparing food, eating the food, like that's a big part of my day. That's like hours out of my day, right? So I don't fast a lot, but I do always try to fast on Good Friday. I just think it's such a beautiful time. I don't work. The only thing I do on Good Friday is like read the Bible and pray and go to church. That's like it. And it's just such a beautiful day that just the entire day is spent in that. But specifically, like when I wake up, instead of the first thing I'm thinking about is like, what am I going to have for breakfast? Instead, I'm like, where do I want to start in the scriptures today? Instead of like, oh, geez, it's time for lunch. Like I need to, now I'm figuring out what I'm going to have for lunch. I'm just in prayer, right? So it's also just, again, setting that time aside, but also having so much extra time because we're not preparing this food and we're not spending time on it and things like that. I think it's kind of this idea of that it talks about in Thessalonians about like praying without ceasing, right? We're like constantly in prayer. The interesting thing though about this whole like idea of fasting and Lent and giving something up is that there's not really, I don't think, a lot of like biblical evidence to really support that we should be doing this. I don't think necessarily it's a bad thing by any means, but in Romans 14:6, it says, the one who observes the day observes it in honor of the Lord. The one who eats, eats in honor of the Lord, since he gives thanks to God. While the one who abstains, abstains in honor of the Lord and gives thanks to God. So truly, like, whether you observe it or you decide to observe it or whether you decide not to, I think it's saying as long as you are doing it for the Lord, as long as you are doing it with the right heart, like that's okay. I don't think this is a command from the Lord to be like, you should be doing this. It's if you want to do it, like that's amazing. Here's some instruction on how to do it, but not necessarily that you have to. It also talks about in 1 Corinthians 8:8. Let me find it here. It talks a little bit more about food in general because again, like I kind of have always sort of laughed. I'm like, why do the Catholics give up meat on Fridays? What does that even have to do with anything, you know? And it says in 1 Corinthians 8:8, but food does not bring us near to God, for we are no worse if we do not eat, or no better if we do. So again, I don't think it necessarily comes to the idea of like the food itself. It's just really like our hearts behind it and what we choose to do. If we're going to do it, if we don't want to do it, I think that's okay. If we're going to do it though, we should do it with a heavy heart and not take it lightly and be very flippant about it. So I know that I am one of these people, I've definitely done this in the past, where I'm like, oh, for Lent, I'm giving up, you know, sweets because I want to lose weight. That's not really an appropriate way to utilize this time. If we want to give it up, that's totally fine. If we want to do it at the same time as everyone else is giving up stuff to like hold us accountable, or we just think it'd be a good thing to do in spring, like that's okay to take care of our bodies and cherish it. Like God gave us these, we should take care of them. But I think that we have to be careful about like how that looks to other people. Like if my non-Christian friends, you know, we're talking and they're like, oh, do you want some birthday cake? And I'm like, no, I gave it up for Lent. Like I gave it up for the Lord. But I gave it up for myself to lose weight. Like that is just a slap in the face to the Lord to be like, I'm more important than you, right? Like I actually care about myself more than I care about you. So I think we just have to be like kind of careful about like why we do it and how we do it. I do think it can be a really cool tool because like, again, a lot of my Christian friends, like, you know, we went to a brewery and they had all these cool beers that have like chocolate in them. And I was like, oh, these sound like so good. I really want them. But I told them, I'm like, but I gave up chocolate for Lent. So like, I can't have these. And so it led to like a conversation where they're like, oh, really? Well, do you feel like this counts? Like because it's beer? And I'm like, well, I really feel like, again, it's just chocolate across the board. And I'm not going to like cheat on this because I'm doing it for the Lord. Like I'm not going to try to like get away with stuff. Like this is important to me. So it allowed us to have that conversation. So it can be a really cool tool, but I think again, we just have to be like, why are we doing this? Like, where's our heart in it? Are we really doing it to draw near to the Lord? Is that like our intent to set this apart for God? Or are we just doing it for ourselves because we feel like we should, because it's tradition, or because, again, a lot of people like we want to lose weight or something. So yeah, I would just wanted to end with this Bible verse. It's from Matthew 6, and it is a pretty well-known verse. But I'll just read it again because I think it kind of sums it up well. So Matthew 6, verses 16 to 18. When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, that your fasting may not be seen by others, but by your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. So I think you guys probably know, but this is basically talking about the Pharisees and how they used to fast, and they would like make such a big show out of it. They'd be like, oh, everyone, I'm so hungry because I'm fasting for the Lord. and like just be so like just wanting people's like, oh wow, look at that person like not eating for God, like wanting to just do it for show. And Jesus is like, please don't do that. That is not what fasting is used for. It's a tool to draw close to the Lord. And I don't think he necessarily means you need to hide it and not tell people, but I think he's just saying like be specific about like how you're using it. So as we are almost wrapping up the Lenten season, we only have a couple more weeks, and then we will be at the Holy Week. We'll be at Palm Sunday and Monday, Thursday, Good Friday, and then of course like culminating in Easter. Let's just try to kind of remember like what this season about, what it's for. If we are fasting, let's kind of just like do it for the right reasons and really be focused on God. If you're physically able to fast, do it. If you're not, please don't. But if you haven't before, I totally encourage it because I do think it's a really, really cool time. Like I said, I always do it on Good Friday, and I usually just do it from like supper on Thursday through like supper on Friday. I think it maybe makes it a little bit easier, but it's just a really cool time because I feel like every time I get hungry, that's the time that I'm reminded to pray and just be like, hey Lord, like please sustain me during this time. I'm doing this for you. I'm laying this down for you. Please sustain me. And it's cool to just watch how he does that, right? Like in America, I feel like we just eat so much. We're so blessed here with all of our gifts. But it's just a different it's just a different experience to like watch how God really like fulfills our needs. So that's all.